Hello, and welcome back to Processing the Process, where we capture and discuss the technical, psychological, and contextual dynamics that shape the process of creating a work of art. Week by week, moment by moment, we're following Allie K. Dakers, teacher, actor, director, and producer, as she shapes the development of her innovative middle school drama club and guides her students' idiosyncratic artistic journeys. Today, we'll be focusing on the January 30th Drama Club meeting. And throughout the meeting, Allie repeatedly talked about the different ways that the Drama Club members will be preparing for their big showcase at the end of the school year. So, as the meeting progressed, she pointed out how each game, each exercise, each area of instruction in things such as acting technique, characterization, scene construction, will help the kids to create a more successful showcase. So, Allie, it seems to me that you took an approach thinking about, pulling back the lens and looking at the whole meeting, that where you provided a big picture context and then, as the meeting progressed, filled in the details. Was this actually your intention?
At this stage of the game, I'm starting to introduce and get the kids comfortable with the idea that there is a show coming and it's not just some idea we've been talking about. So, yeah, we're starting to use the language that we're going to be using in reference to the creation of the showcase. Okay. We're starting to directly point out the skills associated with the various tasks and roles that are going to be involved to bringing it to life. So, yeah, it is deliberate.
Well, it looked like it hooked them right from the beginning, because I think this seems to be the, not only the highlight, but the moment they all are waiting for.
Yeah.
So the kids get, of course, naturally very, very excited about it. Mm-hmm. And the first thing Allie did was to position the warm-up exercises as opportunities to practice skills around directing, such as leading with clarity, confidence, and respect. Mm-hmm. And you also took an interesting approach in choosing a student to lead who was not quite experienced, as experienced, let's say, as some of the others. Why did you decide to do that?
I chose a kid who may have led one of the elements of warm-up in the past, earlier in the year, but and I knew maybe wasn't completely comfortable with it. Maybe they had just done one little part of it, maybe just the clap connect, which is very much a group activity at the same time. And I wanted to show that even though the student who did kind of struggle through it a little bit can still achieve the task. They can still take on that leadership role, even if maybe they didn't consider themselves a leader, perhaps.
Right.
Or maybe, they hadn't always had, an up front and center kind of a role in anything before. Mm-hmm. And there was a level of, a little layer of nervousness that I sensed in this kid. And so I kind of chose that person on purpose, for themselves to see themselves in a new light. Oh, wow, I totally did that. And also when there was some stumbling along the way, I was modeling through the way that I was correcting the student how a director might correct someone who's struggling through a scene as well. And then to the specific skills related to direction that this student was sort of trying on, and something that everybody already knows how to do, the warm-up, that director was allowed to change the pacing or the particular way in which we were going to do our shakedown or whatever it might be, and all the rest of the students had to follow and play along and keep up with the changes that were being made on that spot. which of course we know that taking direction is really what that is, being able to adapt, listening to the person in charge at that moment, if you will,
right.
And taking their advice to heart and taking it seriously. So that's, I'm hoping, and I explained that too, after the fact. I did explain that. That, you know, we congratulated this person, this this newer person on a job well done, and see, anybody can do this if we have these various things intact. You know, they were confident.
Exactly.
Yes, they weren't completely sure, but they knew what they were needing to do, and we moved forward, and you guys all did a great job, you know, making that experience a positive one, or at least an effective one for all of us. And it was positive, not that it wasn't positive. But everybody achieved the task, and hopefully everybody understood that message under the surface, which I did explain. So we'll see.
That makes me actually wonder whether you take a similar approach and motivated by similar ideas to communicate to the kids that anybody can actually inhabit any role in the theater, whether it's on stage, backstage, directing. You know, I think so frequently we tend to pigeonhole ourselves. Oh, I can do this, I can't do that. Yeah. I see myself as this and not that. Mm-hmm. But it seems that the drama club is a place where you can broaden that self-conception. Mm-hmm. And it seems that the way you did it with directing, you could take a similar approach with virtually anything else, and, mm-hmm. and see, hey, you can do absolutely anything across the mm-hmm. spectrum.
Yeah, and we all kind of, we have our aptitudes, we have our strengths, but I do think at this age, it's very much a blank canvas, at least in terms of seeing the possibility of being able to do more than that box we thought we were in.
Right.
Because a lot of us end up in these boxes over the course of our lives. As artists, we perceive ourselves a certain way, and we have to remind ourselves
yes.
That we can, you know, break molds and break the rules and all of these things, and kind of redesign our own self-perspective as we continue to grow and mature as people. But at this middle school level, I mean, this is like the try-on time, you know what I mean? This is the time to sort
right.
of see what box do I want to explore more fully, in addition to kind of being able to do all the other ones. So if I have opened a door for my kids to at least try something on and see whether or not they like it, because maybe they just don't like something too. That's absolutely part of the equation. But I don't want anyone to assume they can't just because they never tried before, or assume
yes.
they can't because someone was like, oh, you're not an actor. Like, I don't want
right.
that mentality to start to develop, because then we start to build habits that become internalized as we progress into adulthood that can keep us from seeing progress before us.
So you're ensuring that holding on to possibilities is a concept that's being introduced at a relatively young age.
Mm-hmm. And at a formative age, a very particularly formative age. It's like that cusp, that adolescent cusp, you know, where a lot of these ideas can become cemented if we don't promote that plasticity there, you know.
Plasticity, great word. Mm-hmm. Well, springboarding from this, Allie then led a bigger discussion on the showcase itself. And she outlined the key areas that all of the kids are going to be focusing on over the next few weeks to enable them to create their own show. So, Allie, could you share with our colleagues what those key elements are that come together in such a way as to allow these kids to create their own production?
Mm-hmm. So we're going to be delving into some advanced acting skills. So we've just been talking a lot about like what you show, what you know, how we connect, using that language, very surface in a sense. Developing character is I not that it's one of the easier things, but it's definitely something more tangible for young actors. So now we're going to get more into intention, objectives, tactics. Why do characters do what they do? How does the energy change when a particular character walks into a room, so to speak? What is the ripple effect of that? How do we're going to start looking into story structure, because of course they're going to be developing their own stories, so we're going to be exploring that dramatic arc. We're also going to be, of course, that relates right to playwriting, so we'll get a little bit of playwriting. And a lot of the playwriting practice goes into really short opportunities of scene creation within the club context. The more formal playwriting will develop through conferences and things, as we'll see as we move forward. And then, of course, production itself, which we did a little bit of with those Techie Olympics.
Yes.
How do we actually produce this thing, get this thing running on this stage? And it really all begins with the pitch meeting, which is coming up in a couple of weeks, we're thinking.
Right.
Yeah, and so that pitch meeting is where the students are going to, many have already started brainstorming on their own, and that's where we kind of gather at that big, long writer's table, so to speak, and the kids who have ideas, they come up to the head of the table. Maybe it's a couple of kids at a time that they've worked on something together. Maybe it's a solo idea. Maybe it's like a full script that some kid has already written, and he's like, I get it, here it is, here's this is my vision, But before we get to that point, we need to have that bigger understanding, and also pulling together, recognizing ourselves as an ensemble, as a group, that we are working all together to create this thing. So there's a lot of different facets that are going to sort of rapid fire be thrown at them over the next, in the coming weeks. So.
Speaking of ensembles, that does lead me into a question I had for you, because during our last videocast, you spoke about the importance of a renewed emphasis on ensemble building at this point in time, because so many of the drama club kids were in the middle school production, which is now over. And so they're returning to the drama club and really need to be able to reintegrate and have that sense of themselves as a cohesive group. So how did you begin to address this in the January 30th meeting?
Yeah, we talked openly about it. I said, as we can, and there wasn't a huge group there, which I also expected. It was literally, they had closed their show like 3 days prior. So many of them are, all the cold germs that were living inside of them, but holding, holding off so they can finally exploded in their body. So like half the school was sick, which, that's across the country, right? It's winter, is what it is. But we all agreed as a group that we need to take some time. If we're going to be moving forward and be successful, we need to take that time to reestablish ourselves, and as a group, as an ensemble, start seeing ourselves as something more than just a group of kids gathering, on a Wednesday, and we're a group with intention and purpose and a vision, that we don't know what that is just yet. But we do, that passion to create something beautiful and colorful and creative is there within each of them. So we need to really tap into that and pull together with that as the through line. And that's going to be a major focus in the next couple of weeks. So.
I was just thinking, do you think the existence of the showcase as, shall we say, the end game here is a facilitating factor in bringing the kids together as they really start to understand that they are, in fact, a cohesive, functioning group that together will be creating this product?
Yes, I do think so. I think the younger kids, the first-year kids, don't necessarily have the awareness of what this actually will turn into. Whereas my returning kids, some who really need to take quite a hiatus, they have sports. Once you become into later middle school, sport options are open to you, which means you have to balance your time differently. There are games and practices and stuff. So I haven't lost touch with these kids. I have been keeping tabs and chatting and all of these things along the way, but I do know there's going to be an influx of kids that have had quite a hiatus and they will be coming back into the group, and they know what they're walking into. So I do believe that the showcase is a driving force of participation and in that way of bringing everybody together, you know, and I'm hoping that they're not just going to kind of walk in and be like, I'm here for the showcase for my scene. Like, that's the one thing that I really do need to kind of
preempt.
It could be a preemptive thing. I mean, I've had little chats along the way with various kids that I know might have been interested that haven't necessarily been here or that were very much involved in the musical and balancing, like being on the basketball team or whatever the case may have been. I'm not sure. I mean, preemptive would be more these casual conversations. I think in a more formal tone, it will be emphasizing the unity of the group and that, you know, there are no stars and all of this kind of mentality that, you know, we as an ensemble pull this thing together. You know, you're not just going to show up on your day that we're rehearsing your scene. Maybe that is in practice what's happening, but like your heart, your mind, like all of this still needs to be there 100% for everybody else too. Like you might be in other scenes. You need to remind yourself that you're open to being cast in other people's scenes. And I don't know that is something to worry about, actually. That's on my radar to kind of keep that at bay if that mentality or that energy kind of arises.
Well, it's interesting because it's reminding me of what we've spoken about from the very beginning as we began the video casts with our colleagues. You have from day one emphasized the concept that we need to be a cohesive unit in order for the drama club to be a successful entity. Similarly, here, in order for the showcase to be successful, we need to be a cohesive unit. And I wonder if linking it very directly to the success of the entire organization and the success of their major initiative is really critical. At least, you know, even enables them to sort of concretize perhaps the notion that can be perhaps somewhat ephemeral.
It can. It's a fine line too. You know, you can't drive something so heavily into the mind of a middle schooler because they'll rebel. You know, it has to come from them. You know, so I have to set things up and set a tone and lead, you know, in a way that makes them want to take it on and makes them want to take the ownership as a group. I can't just be like, you're in charge and you need to do this and this is yours and you know, why are you even here? Like, there's a lot of ways that this can go backfire, you know, or it can be, you know, it can backfire on you if you're not tactful, I guess, with the way you present anything to a middle schooler, actually. You really do.
True.
There's a knack. There's a knack to it.
Yes.
So.
Well, at that point, Allie moved on to work on scene construction with the kids and divided them into small groups. And each group had to pick out of a hat what was called the opening line that they would use to develop their scenes. And at this point, Allie, you talked about outlining what the scenes would require. I mean, the particular scenes, but really any scene at all. Yeah. What are the elements that comprise the construction of a scene? And this really gave you an opportunity to review fundamental skills and concepts. So would you take our colleagues through these scene requirements, so to speak, and also have all of us sort of keep in mind what we had spoken about also in the last video cast, which was your desire to address the issue of the disparity of skills in the kids and I was thinking that this discussion would allow you to address this issue of the need to reinforce acting technique and characterization skills in order to narrow the gap that you were observing recently.
Yeah. So what I noticed in the last couple of weeks, or the times with these disparities of the understandings of these concepts, is creating characters and really expressing them and embodying them, and also aspects related to scene structure, which obviously that's all of it. So let's get into it. We talked about characterization being that characters, what their requirements were, is that their characters needed to be unique. They needed to create them with some delineation. Like if I'm watching this scene, I can clearly see that these are different people, different characters on the stage. It wasn't all, unless they were designed to be in some way. But in this context, I didn't want them to be the same. So within the scene itself, all the characters had to be different. Maybe there was an older person, a younger person, and perhaps not even a human. You know what I mean? So something very different that the kids are making these decisions about, which forces them to be very conscious about the character choices that they're making. We also, in terms of the reviewing of those fundamentals, we reviewed show, know, and connect, which is those external traits is what you show, right? Body, face, voice, body movement, how are we moving our bodies, tone of voice, accents, things like that. These not that they're surface and unimportant, but just they're on the surface. They're external traits. And then we talk about what you know, which are the internal traits, or internal personality, characteristics, etc., psychology, history, all of the backstory.
Right.
All of that. And then we talk about connecting with others on the stage, and I do demonstrate that, where you don't even need words to show like a relationship by how two characters are connecting. So I'd have like a student just stand there center stage, and I would walk in with like a really angry look on my face and like a huff and a puff and just walk away. You know what I mean? And I'd be like, can you see the was the story just told here? And they were like, well, we don't know the details of it, but yeah, like something is going on. I'm like, exactly. And then I'll show like a different emotion or a different energy, so to speak, between myself and that student, to show how you can completely get information. The audience can get information about who you are based on how you behave around another character. Right. And so that's that connect portion of that. And then in terms of scene structure, I outlined we need a beginning, middle, and end, first of all. And then within that, we talk about the various terminologies: inciting incident, conflict, climax or turning point, resolution, all of these different moments that happen within a scene that keep the plot moving. And I had them, what they could, reiterate to me those words. So some kid came up with conflict. I said, what is it, when we have a problem? What is that? When a problem arises, what is that? And usually an older student, because it's just in the nature of what they're learning, someone will yell inciting incident, and someone else might be yelling resolution. It's like, no, like, what is resolution? Think about resolve or resolving something. What does that mean? So I kind of use the language, the terminology, to reestablish the understandings of that scene structure, and say we need to have all of these things in your scene. So you're making sure the characters are all unique and different. We're having clear choices being made with regard to something that we know inside, things that we as the audience can see from the outside, some sort of way in which characters are relating to one another, whether it be positive, negative, neutral, whatever the case may be. There needs to be something there. And then scene structure needs to have, some sort of something that created a conflict, then some sort of turning point or a climax leading down to that resolution that makes sense. It can't just be like, end scene. No, it needs to have some kind of resolution, a flow, and it doesn't have to be complex, but it needs to be intact. So.
Well, it sounds like this review was also creating a structure within which they could operate. And almost, I was going to say, and then I didn't want to say, but then I'll say it anyway, a paint by numbers approach. Of course, you don't want paint by numbers per se, but just in terms of the fundamentals.
Yeah, I mean, you need to. It's like a Mad Libs. It's like, let's create the story, you fill in the blanks, in a sense. I guess paint by numbers is probably a better analogy. But, and that's what that opening line really was for them.
Right.
We talked about what they can create on their own, but then I gave them something to anchor to. I gave them some context. I gave them something a character can say, which they can then take anywhere. But it also puts them in there are some guidelines there. You know, their line, if it says, you know, sorry ma'am, you know, I can't get you that cup of coffee today. Well, where are we if that happens? Does that happen in a classroom? Not really. Where might that happen? So by giving them a particular line of text, they then can build around that in a way that makes sense for them without having to come up with something from scratch, which sometimes it's kind of a crapshoot when that happens. At this point, you know, we will get there where we can kind of blossom out of these ideas, but right now I need to see and I need them to practice working with something concrete that they're building around at this point with these fairly firm guidelines that we're all looking for, analyzing, and thinking about. So,
well, might this be, as with any endeavor, one has to learn the fundamentals, and sometimes in some endeavors that can be difficult, tedious, and so forth. But once you've got that foundation, you can springboard off of it in infinite creative ways.
Yeah.
So it sounds like you wanted to be sure that that foundation was there and was solid.
Yeah. And the conversation, I try not to make it tedious, as we've discussed in earlier Videocast. It's not like we're all just sitting there and I'm talking. It's more like a discussion, like a Socratic conversation where I'm like, you, what are you, and what about this part, and what about that part, and hey, add to that. You know, it's all very much a conversation that we're having, that this is all, the information is arising out of, as opposed to like a lecture. I really try to stay away from that, because that is where you fall into tedium and you know, tuning out and all of these things. So
exactly. Well, once Allie had set the scene, so to speak, she gave the kids about 15 minutes to construct their scenes, and that also gave you an opportunity to work with each group individually to be available in whatever way they might need you. And then they each performed the scene that they had constructed. And the kids, from what you say, Allie, did a really, really terrific job. And you were noting that this was a vast improvement over their previous scene work, which seems to me to support your inclinations to go back to the basics, set it up in a structured kind of way.
Repetition.
Exactly. And sure enough, they were able to produce at a different level, it sounds like, than they had prior to that.
Yeah, which was pleasing to see.
Oh, absolutely.
Definitely.
And then, of course, as we've come to see, following the performances, Allie kicked off the Analyze, Critique, Compliment segment. And with this particular one, Allie, I'd love for you to share with us what actually emerged during this activity, because you really explained to the kids how giving and receiving constructive criticism actually winds up facilitating better character development and scene development, that they're really linked in terms of improving one's skills, and that in turn is directly linked with the quality of the showcase they're going to be able to assemble.
Yeah. So when we talk about analyze, first of all, whatever the focus was of the discussion, so to speak, is what they're thinking about. So in this context, they're thinking about character, they're thinking about story structure. Maybe other times, like next time we do this, will be objective. What's their objective? What are their tactics? This time was characterization and story structure. So when we are looking through that lens, it actually forces them to sort of look through a director's eyes and also reflect back of their own work as the actors in their own scenes. They may not be up at that stage that time, but they're noticing and looking for the different methods and the different tactics that we as actors employ to tell the stories. So it improves their overall work in that context, their skill building just by observing and thinking about what they're observing and thinking about what they're going to say about what they're observing. So right off the bat, it's all these layered things that help build an understanding, which, of course, we see reflected in their future work, hopefully.
That's the goal.
Yeah. Also, the way in which, like, the actual structure of how we do, like, the compliment and critique, we always end with compliments. That's true. Right. So we analyze, then we critique, and then we always compliment at the end. So we're kind of bringing it home with those good vibe feelings, you know. And it also that reconnects and can support the resiliency in the students, and it builds the trust between them. And the way in which I actually have this happening is we have our stage back, yay. So we were on our stage, so the kids performing are on the stage, the kids critiquing, etc., are in the audience. So once the scene is over, I have all the actors in that scene line up. You know, they line up and they're standing there. And I say, okay, guys, like, you know, what did we notice? That would be the analyzing part. And they're like, oh, they had this and they had that. Where was the turning? Well, probably here. Good job. You know, we're talking about the different elements of the scene that we noticed that they had to, you know, keep intact in the scene. And then I say, well, all right, let's move. Let's. What could they improve upon? And I say, now keep in mind, we're not just saying, wow, that was terrible. We're noticing something that can be improved, and then we're going to give a suggestion on how we can improve that. So that also builds directing skills right off the bat. It builds awareness of the tactics of an actor, and sometimes, you know, a kid might not have really thought about how to improve something, but once they start saying what needs to be improved, it's, well, how can we improve it? Then a little mini brainstorm starts where 3 or 4 different voices come. Maybe you can do this, or maybe you can do that. So now all of a sudden the wheels are turning, and the scene that was on stage are earning, you know, are gaining awareness of their own work and saying, oh, okay, so next time I can do it like this. But the kids themselves doing the critiquing, or if they're ever in that situation, they now are building their toolbox. So what can I do? What can I do? Oh, I can do this, this, or this when that happens. You know what I mean? And back to resiliency too. Never mind the regrouping at the end, but the process of being critiqued. I think that especially, I shouldn't say in this generation, it's everybody. I mean, it's hard to hear when, you know, you haven't done your best, or when there's something to improve. And no groups did like poorly at all, and no one, you know, was like, that was awful. But by standing there and hearing the words, but hearing them given to you with respect and with an intention of improvement, we try and teach that, okay, so, all right, I might not feel awesome that I'm hearing these words, but I'm strong enough that I can take these words now and turn it into something better next time I give it a try, you know? So we understand that criticism is aimed at prompting growth, not tearing somebody down, right? And if we can, and this is like that bigger picture teacher, you know, person within me, like, if I can get through a drama program my kids to feel that way about life in general, well, never mind the showcase, like that's like the real goal, you know what I mean? If we can build more resilient kids in general to turning into more resilient adults, like that's the win right there. So I want to give them this opportunity, an incredibly safe space to experience and to go through what it's like to be critiqued. And they give it and they take it, you know. So that group will come on down, and then they're the ones in the shoes watching and critiquing. So it's not like there's just one group that's being torn apart in some way, which they're not. We know what kind of language to use now. We've been through this enough that everything's very respectful, and with an intention, you know, that's positive. But then they flip the switch, and they're the ones doing it, which kind of builds the compassion, and again, it strengthens that actor and director vision that they have, and they understand that all of this is a process. You know, we're going to have the ups and downs. We're going to stumble along the way. Things are going to get scrapped, you know, and other things are going to be even possibly pulled from the bin, reworked and strengthened, and be even better than we could have imagined it to be. And to go through the process of that criticism and the complimenting and the thinking about what we did and how we did it, because I did ask one group that was particularly strong, and I'd overheard them working too, if they had made any changes along the way. So by overhearing them during the process, I was able to then have them reflect on that process for the whole entire group, and that was a really nice moment as well. So, you know, and they generally learn that it doesn't just happen. Like there's a whole lot of process.
I mean, no art springs forth
really
fully
doesn't.
Formed.
Yeah, not this kind of art.
Not this kind.
Yeah, yeah,
exactly.
It springs in the moment, and then we have all of this work and structure around it to kind of make it into that final product. So,
but tying it back in, it seems to me, again, to the notion of ensemble building, that you engaged in this type of activity collectively. So you mentioned earlier, and I can just imagine the level of trust that needs to be in place in order to do this, and that trust is developing and becoming stronger and stronger and stronger, and in so doing, it seems to me, increasing the cohesion of the group. And also the other thought that occurred to me is that the more that the kids collectively can help each individual to grow, the more they as a unit grow as well. I mean, always, you know, coming back to that connection of what benefits the individual benefits the entire group, and conversely, what concerns the individual or this group within the group, it's always a group issue, and you're coming back repeatedly to these kinds of ideas. So it sounds as if you were able to kind of click off your boxes, if you will, in terms of what you were hoping to achieve. Not all in one shot, let's say, but at least, you know, incrementally. So we thank you for being with us this evening, and we look forward to sharing with you those incremental steps of the process and how the kids engage with it, respond, and ultimately grow. And it's a thrill, I think, not only for the kids, but certainly for us. And we hope for you as well. So thank you once again, and stay tuned for our next production in the series.
Thank you.
Have a good night. Well, we are having technical difficulties.